So we're in beautiful London. It's hot as heck today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here too. So we're going to talk a lot about different topics today. I'm really going to enjoy this conversation. So could you perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you came from and how you ended up here in London?
Yes. So my name is Teresa Walsh. My background is political science area, actually. And I did get a bachelor's and a master's in political science with an emphasis on international relations. And that's what I was most interested in. I'm American, as you can tell, but my first job was with the Navy as a civilian, and so I started traveling around and basically volunteering for every sort of abroad work placement that they had, and I got the bug, and so I've been moving around ever since, but now I live here.
So how did you get into the intelligence side?
They gave me a job.
That's a route, I guess.
Yeah. So when I was graduating with my master's, I started, basically spamming everyone I could. And back in those days, we did have email, but it was, the old-fashioned, just kind of, finding a job vacancy. There was monster.com back then. Not all the different tools that they have, but you were basically spamming anyone you could find for a job. And I only got maybe 3 people who reached out to me to say that they were interested, and one of them did offer me a job, and it was the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. And it was because it was post 9/11. So all the agencies at the time were rapidly increasing their funding for more analysis because they wanted to get over the intelligence failure of 9/11. So I came in as I say, one of the 9/11 babies who were brought, straight from university and brought in to try to fight terrorism.
Yeah. And throughout your career, how was the approach, the training, sort of how did you get into learning about intelligence, learning on the job, the training courses? How did that happen?
Yeah, so it was all through the government to start with, and so they did a pretty good job about it. I was on the Department of Defense side, so that's a different type of training than you might get in some other agencies. One of the big training schools at the time was at DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and so almost everybody from the Defense Department areas would go through their schools, and they did the traditional structured analytical techniques and just how to do this, how to do that. And so I got all my training through the government. Of course, you do get a lot of on-the-job training, and I have brought that to my private sector career of understanding that it's not just about the classroom setting, it's also about, what you get on the job. Because I also think that, for certain people, that helps you with your memory retention a little bit better if you've actually gone through the process for real-life situations.
Interesting. We're going to talk more about that when we get into the AI section, because I have some thoughts and questions about that too. So how long did you work in the intelligence community, if you can say?
Yeah, almost 10 years. I think it was about 9 years or so. But I did the civilian work with NCIS, and that took me to different countries as well. So I did a tour of duty in Bahrain. I did a tour of duty in Singapore. And that was a lovely time. And then I went contractor first. So I guess I was baby stepping a little bit towards the private sector. And my contract job, I loved. It was a fantastic job in the United States. And then my husband, I guess I got married and everything. My husband's not in this world. He has nothing to do with the government. And he got a job in New York City. And so at one point I had to say, I have to leave government service. And the banks at the time were hiring former government people to bring intelligence tradecraft into cyber intelligence.
Nice. And how was that transition? Going from you were a civilian employee.
Yes.
At some time. So I guess the transition going into private sector wasn't that big, or?
For me, it was big. And I tell everybody who's going from government to private sector life to give yourself at least a good 6 months, because there's a mental and cultural change for you. And the mental one, I think, is, it's purely psychological of you were in the government. You felt like, you're working national security issues. You feel important. You feel like you're doing something that means something to people, and then suddenly you're helping a bank save money, and that's a very different type of psychology that you have to grapple with. But once you get to the point where you realize that, wait a second, everybody in the world has a bank account pretty much, or a mortgage, or a student loan, or a credit card, and by helping them fight crime, you are actually helping the world. And so I think you basically have to kind of go through almost like a philosophical debate in your mind about what you're doing, and that the fact that it is still important.
Yeah. And when you moved into the private sector, you said you worked in the bank, and that's fine. And then you ended up in your current job. How was that transition?
Yeah, so I always, even when I was in the government, I liked to collaborate. I really liked to work with other people and kind of pick their brains and just kind of understand, what am I missing? Or do you see the same things I'm seeing? And going back and forth. And at the time, the U.S. government at one point had started up a social media network inside the government, inside the intelligence community. It was called A-Space. I remember this, like MySpace, A-Space, analytical space. Yeah, yeah. I'm aging myself again. But and I really got into that. I really liked it. It was, I think it was a confluence type of environment, but I really got into it because I was meeting all these different people, and I was really kind of trying to collaborate. And I would even go to conferences, and I would meet people, and they'd say, "Oh, you're Teresa Walsh." Well, my maiden name at the time. They're like, "You're Teresa Walsh."
So were you famous or infamous?
Maybe a little bit of both. Yeah. I actually probably a little bit of the latter, but they would recognize me because I was so kind of open and really wanting to talk to people about our different target sets and what we were finding out. And at the time, I was also trying to be a little innovative. And it's not going to sound innovative when I say it, but it really was at the time, that multiple source research is actually using more than one source of different types of intelligence. And yeah, it was like,
what? Gasp.
New and innovative at the time, that it's not just about using two human sources. You're actually using SIGINT and IMINT and all sorts of things to bring into the mix. And so that was kind of my thing, is bringing in different types of intelligence to then work this, the problem set. Yeah. And so, and to do that, I had to talk to other people, and
networking, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I brought that type of, job ethic to the private sector. And at the time, the bank I was working with was a member of FSISAC. And so I started getting involved. They were members also of a few other organizations. So I got involved in those. And then Citibank had let me move over to Europe. And so I was working for them in Germany, and I started getting involved in all the European associations and really kind of understanding what they're doing. But I kept up with that kind of, external outreach of really just trying to build a network, build, a group of people looking at the same things I'm looking at to learn from them, basically.
Tell me a little bit about what is the CINO?
Yeah. Well, as you know, the Chief Intelligence Officer is still a fairly new concept. There are a few companies that are now doing it, and kind of looking to see, what does that actually mean? You do see that sometimes with vendor communities where, they're building a product suite for the threat intelligence community. And so some of them have CINOs. It's funny because sometimes I get called the CIO. I'm like, I'm not a CIO, so I have to correct them about that sort of thing. But the concept is basically having an umbrella concept, because we are global. We have staff in 7 different countries, and we have the client base basically in 70 different countries. So we do have to have kind of like that umbrella concept of understanding how to help everybody, because it's not a cookie cutter type of thing that you can do. What helps one industry doesn't help necessarily the other industry. What helps one country has to be reframed for a different country, and things like that. So my job is basically like a department head. It's overseeing the Department of Intelligence.
Yeah, and if I understand you correctly, you have multiple departments because of the regions the organization covers. There are multiple teams basically that you run. Interesting. And again, multiple sources from multiple people, merging everything together.
Yeah.
Sounds like all source that we're used to, or an ASIC, all source intelligence cell, from my old job at least. Yeah. That's interesting. So what is your long-term career goals in terms of intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, or do you want to go into knitting or hiking? What's your long-term goal?
Yeah, well, it sounds weird in my late 40s of what do I want to be when I grow up, but I love the intelligence work that I do, but at the same time, over the years, I've also come to realize that it's more than just about what we do. It's about how we help our stakeholders and what our stakeholders are doing. And of course, in a financial institution, like a bank, they actually are doing banking things, and they're doing financial type of things, and they're not just doing the technology side of the house. And so I've been pushing myself more and more over the years to understand how it all fits together. That it is more than just, doing good intelligence. It is about how do you fit with the company that you work for? How do you fit in the greater ecosystem as well? And of course, now, cyber intelligence is viewed as part of, critical national infrastructure work that people are doing in different countries or regions. Finally, yes. They do have seats at the board table now. And, I think it is part of that understanding of the greater picture of where we fit. It's not just about doing the job well. It's about making sure that you fit in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah. In terms of intelligence and what you've done in your history, it seems like you've been working with a lot of interesting stuff, and now you work in the civilian sector, and you're the CINO, and that's an amazing career so far. When we talk about intelligence, what is intelligence to you, and what is it not? This is a broad question, I know, but let's see where we go.
So for me, intelligence is a profession. It's not about being smart or, being smarter than the next person next to you. It is an actual profession, like a doctor, an accountant. You have to learn how to do it. Like right now we have seen some of the commentary about the closures of some intelligence schools. And, some people kind of naysaying that, you don't need to pay somebody to study intelligence. And my argument would be, but you do, because how would you expect them to do the job if you've never trained them to do the job? And for us as analysts especially, there are a lot of techniques, there are a lot of things that you have to consider. It's kind of for me, it was always a little bit like grad school, continued, understanding, your writing skills, the primary sources you're going to use, cross-referencing your data, things like that.
I'm getting so warm inside right now. This is so good. Yes.
And so for me, intelligence is a profession. And this is something that, I don't think the private sector, has quite grasped yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. And when we talk about intelligence, and to me now it sounds like the intelligence methodology, the tools, the techniques, how we apply intelligence is sort of your core message, that what intelligence is. So that's the intel side. What about cyber threat intelligence?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things here too to grasp.
Yes, and I did not start in cyber. I started in the good old-fashioned terrorism space, and then I went into counterintelligence, and then I went into cyber only after I left government service. So I never got the government training in cyber like you would have, and we had started cyber things, but at the time, cyber was a tool, not an int. And so, it was one of those things that I happened to be in the government at the time when cyber was starting to become a concept. We started Cyber Command, for instance, and I remember that, they came to every single agency and they were like, anything you have that touches the internet now belongs to us. And we're like, but that doesn't make sense at all.
That's everything.
That's everything. And so there was the growing pains of understanding in the government side what cyber is. And I still think that that's something that the private sector is still going through, because where I find the intelligence, tradecraft, and profession break down is because we don't have a standard in the private sector of what does cyber intelligence mean. And usually what I find is that you have almost two camps. You have the camp that came from government, and that's the tools we brought. And then you have those that, maybe were computer science people and things like that. And then suddenly were told one day, congratulations, you're a CTI analyst. And they were expected to know what that means. And then even beyond that, you do have, I think, a difference, because in the government side, I was an analyst. I was what we call a 0132. That was my designation. And that was who I was. I was sitting at a desk in front of a computer my entire, government career. But obviously those weren't the only people in the building. There were the collectors, the operators. And in cyber, there are no two distinctions for that. Analysts are collectors and collectors are analysts. But still we haven't taught them, because our collectors back in government, they had to go to school. In the Army, they would go to Fort Huachuca or some other place, and they would go through entire weeks full of just learning how to be a collector. Same way for, analysis, that you would go to these, trainings, camps or courses or whatever it might be, how to be an analyst. In cyber, in the private sector, we don't really have that. I mean, you do have SANS classes,
right?
But before, the SANS class that you're doing with analysis, there was nothing like that. It was I did 504, for instance, and when I went there, it was much more the kind of the geeky technical. This is what you do, and in terms of collection and maybe red teaming, penetration testing, and things like that. But it wasn't analysis in the way that I learned analysis. Right. It wasn't the critical thinking of what you were, looking at and what you were actually getting. And so I find that still has not been established for the private sector. If you even just go on LinkedIn or, any job site, all sorts of titles. We don't have any sort of standard for the title of who are you? Are you an engineer? Are you an analyst? Are you a ninja? Whatever it might be. And I think that confuses everything. But the worst part is that it confuses what to expect from that person in that role. Because you're dealing with a lot of people who don't know anything about intelligence, who are in the C-suite level, and they're expected to understand how to use these people when they don't know what they should be expecting.
And this is the interesting side of what I see a lot, and I usually use the analogy of when an officer is trained, he goes through officer school, and we do what we call a PBP, so a planning and decision process in Norwegian English, but that's what it is. A huge part of it is intelligence. The leader always confers with the intelligence team before they start planning. In the private sector, there isn't a single credit of how to use and how to utilize the intelligence function in planning and maintaining and running a business.
Yes.
Which to me is where we sometimes meet the issue you just talked about, where we have leaders who don't know what the intel or cyber threat intel function is and can do, and how they can actually maximize the value of that role and function in their organization, which I find it is challenging to have that conversation with the CISO or the CINO, sorry, not the CINO, but with the CRO, the Chief Risk Officer, etc.
Yes. Because if you have a leader who, at the end of the day, only expects an IOC feed to go through and one day be automated and one day have, AI tell you what it says, then why would they invest in their people? Why would they give them training? Why would they even expect them to do more things like strategic intelligence reports?
And that's today, right? But the last 10 years, we've been in a situation where they have not had AI. And they have not had LLMs and other tools. They had humans. And it didn't change then. And now we have the AI situation where leaders are, they're using AI. Well, we'll talk more about this. This is going to be really interesting and fun to talk about when we get into the AI part. But on the topic of AI, what is AI to you? What is it not?
So I find, as a sci-fi and fantasy buff, I do find, the concept of AI long coming. It has technically been here for a while, but we won't get into that. But what I find disturbing about Gen AI, like ChatGPT, is this kind of thought that you can replace the humans with, and especially the human CTI analyst, with these type of concepts. And that was before even people any understood at all about LLMs and the pluses, the minuses, how do you form your models and things like that. And even at the end of the day, you might have in 10 years from now, the best LLM that's going to support your analyst. You're still going to need the analyst, because at the end of the day, I do find that you cannot escape the fact that we still have human beings in all of these roles, all of these positions, all of these decisions. And until you fully automate an entire company where you don't have any humans, you're going to need a human analyst.
Yeah, and I tend to agree on this, and I'm in the same sort of camp. To me, when I talk about AI, I talk about the concept of AI, everything. When I talk about LLMs, that's a small part of AI. And a lot of people, when they say AI, they mean LLMs. They mean the ChatGPT and the other large language models, right? So, and that's a problem when we have a discourse, a discussion. When everyone talks about AI, but basically only talk about a small portion of it, we can't generalize everything about AI into a really small part of it. That's one part. And the other is, at the moment, one of the issues we have right now is that decision makers probably do good enough. So if they can get something seemingly good enough from an LLM, and they can make a decision off of it, or we as humans can spend 2 days or 2 weeks and get sort of ish to the same result, why should they wait 2 weeks? That is the question I, at the moment at least, think might be an issue. And where we, I think, have to not chase the dragon, but rather add value. So if they get an LLM to say this and that, we need to figure out how we can add value to that. They will start using it. I don't doubt that for a second. But we have other issues where the AIs are adding stuff that's not in the source material, hallucinating. It might take information from multiple sources and put it together in a way that seemingly looks good, but it's not real. I've seen that multiple times. And it forgets or excludes stuff that's really important in our context, right? So the LLMs these days, it can summarize certain things, but it'll either add stuff, combine stuff that it shouldn't, or forget stuff that's really important to you. And it can never tell you about your context, the things you worry about. And that's where I think the human comes in, right? But the problem with the AIs and the summaries and everything right now, the LLMs, it is we never know when it happens until we really get intimate with the material. So am I actually saving time if, one, I don't know when it's faulting, so I have to go in and engage with the material. So I could have actually written the summary myself, but it takes me maybe 2, 3, 4 hours to really read the material to figure it out. And you can get an answer in 5 seconds. There are some interesting challenges here. So I'm challenging everyone that tells me, hey, we have AI this and AI that. Really? How do you deal with, adding or, forgetting or combining? Oh, we, trust us. We have guardrails. No. If OpenAI, who's generating a LLM, can't figure it out, and you can, you're going to make gazillions. I promise you haven't. You're lying, right? So there's some interesting discussions to be had here.
I completely agree with everything you're saying, and I think we'll probably kind of get into it a little bit more too, but I also kind of worry that all the investment is going towards trying to figure out, how to do AI, and, maybe some of the investment needs to be looking at the human beings and their training and what they're doing, because at the end of the day, even if you do have an LLM, the analyst still needs to, like you said, verify the information that they're getting, but they need to know how to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's more and more training that includes AI tools and stuff, and it's also going to be interesting to see, because when you get into government side, you have the high side, the secret side. Getting AI and technology in there that, is watertight in terms of not sending stuff out, but then again, how can they use it and trust it? So there are a lot of research grants out there and projects working on this. It's going to be interesting. in your current job, what is your team or you guys using in terms of CTR intelligence methodologies? What are you applying?
Yeah, so at the beginning when we first started out, it was more just kind of trying to make sure that we were doing actual analysis in the first place.
Yeah.
We were gathering a lot of information and pushing that raw information out, and I call it raw.
I'm so glad you're saying raw data and information, not intelligence.
Yes.
Thank you.
And and that's an entirely other conversation we could probably go on about for a while too, is how many times people mistake one for the other as well. So we were gathering lots of raw information that was unverified by us, at least. We were counting on the sources, doing some level of validity checks and everything. But, the first step was kind of just, analyzing what we were getting. And that, was a little bit of mixture of, traditional intel, tradecraft, of just questioning things, asking questions, maybe doing a little team A, team B type of thing, trying to understand that, we're not just jumping to conclusions that everything is Russia's fault.
I'm getting a little warm.
That sort of thing. And, those types of traditional things, but then also bringing in, the more CTI type practices in terms of, doing PDNS and doing, who is checks and, pivoting from that information and, starting, depending on what tools you had access to, really kind of going further of looking at certificates and looking at user agents and, going through the, the PCAP files and things like that. And so it was a little bit both the technical analysis that we were doing, but also, the tradecraft and trying to be true to what we were doing. And as we start getting bigger, because now we're about 28 people worldwide, it was much easier when we were just 5 people, because then we could all talk about it and really kind of collaborate. Now that we're 28 people, it is a lot harder to do those types of collaborative work. You can't do it necessarily globally. You have to kind of do it in chunks, basically, in small groups. But we realized a few years ago that, some of the people that we had hired at the beginning who had that legacy knowledge and, had unfortunately left us, and we had hired some younger people in, but that those younger people didn't necessarily have some of the training that we had. And so you had to kind of teach them like the Admiralty scale and the fact that likely and probably really are 2 different things. And those types of concepts, and also just kind of, some of the more basic things of like bleeping computer is not a primary source and and all these things that we had to kind of go through. So we actually did some training modules where, we had, a couple people do like, just like little videos and use that as kind of in-house training. We also had some train the trainer type of situations where we'd have somebody who maybe was really good at like virus total graph or something like that to try to teach you, this is how you do it. This is how you kind of, verify the source from virus total, because not everything in virus total is also, completely legitimate as well. So, but those types of approaches. But, for me, my big thing, as a manager has always been to push the fact that we are a team, and it's not about necessarily, one individual going off and just doing their own thing, that we have to bring all of our strengths and weaknesses together into one collective group and then hopefully help each other out at that point.
Yeah. And what do you see as the value of using intelligence methodologies and applying it in your work?
I think it's completely invaluable, because you cannot make assumptions in today's day and age about what you're looking at, because if you just jump to the conclusion that it's the Russians every single time, you're going to be missing a lot of things. And so, especially now that the geopolitical climate's so heated, we do need to have time for critical thinking. Maybe back in the day we could just say, it doesn't matter who it is, it's just a bad guy. And that was good enough. It's a bad guy trying to steal money. It's a bad guy trying to steal, intellectual property. But at the end of the day, now people want to try to make attribution and judgments about what they're trying to achieve. Yeah. And that affects how you defend against it. And so if you make the wrong call, you might be investing your controls into some place that's not actually what they're trying to do. Yeah.
And this is really interesting, right? Because you could defend against everything.
Yes.
But intelligence to me is about figuring out who are the most relevant threat actors who want to breach your system.
Yes.
Right? So if there is a group working in Southeast Asia, you don't have any operations or using any of that technology, should you be worried about it? But my manager says, hey, what about that group in South Asia? You should probably say that's not a problem, sir, and then get on with your job and not start kicking up dirt.
Yes.
And, boiling the water just to get information about the thing that's irrelevant to you.
And I find this so important because there are obviously companies that have, gazillion dollars in their budgets, and they can, have, dozens, if not hundreds of people looking at the same problem set. Most companies are not like that.
Agreed.
They actually have to prioritize their budget and their investment decisions. And this is where I find intelligence to be invaluable, because it does actually help you prioritize against what's actually happening against you. Because I think we've all seen those comments on social media of like, oh, that, those idiots, they should have been blocking X, Y, and Z, or they should have been patching X, Y, and Z. It's so easy to, criticize from the outside, isn't it? But, it's because every company has their limitations in terms of budget and people, and you can't do everything all at once. And we wish we could, but you have to choose. Today is the day. What are you going to do? And you have to do it from a prioritization list. But how are you prioritizing in the first place?
And also, some systems, if you're going to patch it, you have to take it down. And then that means systems are unavailable for employees for maybe half a day or some hours, and also for clients and customers. That has to be really carefully planned. And as you just said, you have to prioritize your time, your resources, and also availability and all the other consequences. Taking down a small system in the basement might take down the whole system in a different place that has ramifications that are bigger than just, we need to patch. So there's a lot of things that naysayers and people on the outside have opinions about.
Try telling a trader that you have to take their laptop away from them for a day or two and to patch up a system that might actually make their systems run half a second slower as well. They will go ballistic at you, and that's when it really comes to light about you're not a technology company just doing intelligence work. You're a bank, you're an energy company, you're a water company, whatever it might be. You have to do business, and so there has to be this balance between what you can do from the intel and security side and what you can do as a business.
So when you started into the whole system, the situation and the position you have right now, did you face any challenges of applying intelligence methodology? Were you hired for it and they would say, go nuts? Or did they say, go nuts, but you met the walls every turn you made?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything. And so we actually said at the time that I was hired to put the A in the ISAC. And because they did realize that they weren't actually doing analysis. And I was a client before I was a staff member. So I was able to actually say from my point of view as a member, as a client, that you're sitting on all this raw information, but you're not doing anything with it. You really need to be doing something with it. And that's, why they hired me. I was kind of like the first one who was going to be looking at that area. And so in some ways it was kind of like, we don't really know what that means, so just figure it out. But on the other side, you did have some people saying, well, do we actually need this? Is this even a gap that, for our company that we need to do? And so it was a little bit of both depending on who you asked. And there were some brick walls. And, I was able to I always kind of feel like once you prove yourself, once you kind of start showing that what you're doing is valuable, not only to your fellow employee, but also to your customer, then people want it and they want more of it. And, once you kind of do that proof of concept, then you have a product basically. And that's basically what I had to do. It was never, ask permission first and then try to figure it out. It was just do it and then prove the worth.
I had the same thing. I was hired. There's some intelligence thing we think it's really important, figure it out. That was sort of my boss, and I was like, but what do you want, what do you need? I was expecting this direction. This is where you're going to go, then let me go and I'll do it. But he was like, I don't know how this is going to look, you need to figure it out. It took me a year. when I started, to figure out the organization, the membership, the requirements. They've never done stakeholder analysis. They've never done requirements collection, processing, and prioritization of that, generating then standing IRs, intelligence requirements, and then starting producing on it.
Yes.
That was nothing, that was completely foreign to them.
And that right there is the huge difference between the public and private sectors.
Yeah.
Because in the public sectors, now the government, the military, whatever it might be, has, got to a point where they say, this is our foreign policy, this is our trade policy, whatever it might be. Now we need to have our intelligence agencies focused on those, requirements, basically. And then you kind of break it down and what does that actually mean.
Yeah.
In the private sector, you do not have that.
Yeah.
It is literally we just want to make sure nothing breaks. And that's the only direction you get.
Or there was something exciting on CNN yesterday. What is that about? And you go, I'm cyber, sir. I don't do bombs in Iran. I have no idea what you mean. But then people start boiling the ocean to figure out what this is. It doesn't matter. But anyway, it might be some residual DDoS thing. But then again, is that a problem to us if we have really good defenses? No. So anyway, that's my...
So now we're going to get into the geopolitical discussions. This is where we need to go as a private sector, is that it's not just about the training of the analyst of how to do analysis. It is also about the training of the company of how to use intelligence.
Yeah, agreed. And to get into the whole discussion of the geopolitics and what we should focus on, you have organizations that have business in or vendors and dependencies in that might be influenced stuff that happens, the South China Sea, in the Middle East, or in, Eastern Europe. Of course, I get that. But sometimes I feel that a lot of analysts who have the role of cyber threat intelligence get it, all up in arms about something that happens kinetically somewhere today, and they need some information about that today. I'm like, no, the smoke hasn't cleared yet. They haven't done the BDA, the battle damage assessment yet. We don't know. And by the way, why is this a concern to you and your organization? You have no business there most of the time. And if you do, it's a war down there. And how does that affect your decisions today and tomorrow? You have to have a discussion, of course, about the long-term effects, but then you have to do foresight and scenario analysis. That's a bigger thing, right? So I have this whole issue with this.
It's the so what factor at the end
agree.
of the day. And so COVID was another perfect example of that, because there were people giving like not just daily, like multiple times a day updates of how many infections there were and which state was doing this policy and stuff like that. And as a human going through the lockdowns and things like that, you were interested in it. But in terms of how does that affect the cyber landscape, that connecting the dots was missing.
I agree. And I couldn't see it.
Yeah. And so, but you had to kind of explain it in terms of then, again, the human aspect of it is that, first of all, all your cyber defense teams were kind of distracted at the time. They were working from home, and maybe they didn't have the right setup from home. There was, I remember a few companies had issues with people trying to social engineer them, trying to be their IT help desk, that sort of thing. There were those types of issues. There were the issues of supply chain. So that did, have significant vulnerabilities in terms of whether or not your company was actually getting the supplies that they need. Some companies had like call centers based in different countries that then, couldn't operate or something like that. And so, but you had to, for me, it was always about trying to connect the dot back to the cyber world and back to our company, not just about the fact that, so-and-so had so many deaths and so-and-so had, has shut down schools and things like that. Again, that's important for us as human beings going through the situation, but not as cyber professionals going through the situation.
Right, and that's sort of where I think my blood starts boiling sometimes, is the resources we spend on something we find interesting when we have the building on fire type of thing. We haven't done the minimal things we need to do, like how is this going to affect our call center? How is this going to affect human beings that are working at our organization that are home being through phishing or smishing and other types of attack? That's what we should worry about, not how many beds that are available in a hospital in New York when we're sitting in Europe. That's irrelevant in that context, right? But yes, understand COVID is a specific and very broad issue because it hits us all. And we're all curious. We're all scared. I get that from that perspective. But when we see current events and elections or attacks in Middle East and plans through South China Sea, certain things we can connect, and certain things I'm not seeing why it's relevant.
But I think that's another problem with both the training of the analysts and also the expectations of the C-suite. Because the C-suite is almost looking at us like news scrapers. I read about so-and-so today. What can you tell me about it?
Yeah.
And so the C-suite is putting the expectation on the analysts to scrape the news.
Yeah.
And, that's, in some ways it is interesting, like all the geopolitical stuff, from a political scientist background, I find it very fascinating. But whether or not they bombed this city or that city, that doesn't necessarily matter in the cyber context. It's more of understanding what does this all mean, in terms of ramp ups, because, nation states do have cyber capabilities, as we know. Iran does have a cyber capability, but also so do their friends, and so do us, And so if we're talking, I always kind of find it fascinating that we always focus just on the threat, and we don't focus on what else might get out, what else might be happening at the time.
Also
and
us,
so,
right? They don't live in a vacuum, the threat, in air quotes. It is us too. We have defensive, we have detection capabilities. We're not like bare naked and just getting hit by everything in the wind. We actually have some protection layers, right? We can actually detect and respond to stuff. And some countries, although have capabilities, their capacity and capability might not be up to par with certain things.
Yeah, and that's a continual analysis, assessment of their capabilities and their strengths and intentions and motivations. Because, I think when we saw that Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is going to go nuts in the cyber realm. There's going to be wiper malware all over the place. It's going to shut down the world again because of the NotPetya attacks and WannaCry and things like that. But it didn't happen. If you're in Ukraine, it did happen.
It did happen to them.
It did happen to them.
And it's continually happening to them.
Yeah, but it didn't balloon out the way everybody thought it would.
Yeah.
And, you had the hacktivist, of course. And then there was, some really interesting, I think, things with the Conti leaks about the ties between ransomware actors and government actors and things like that.
And also groups, having both Russian and Ukrainian members, and that tore everything up. And that was the Conti leak reasons.
Yes, And so I found all that really, really fascinating at a human level as well, but also bringing that back into the cyber context and whether or not you might be targeted.
Yeah.
I found that, also a really good exercise that not enough people were actually doing, because sometimes in our industry you do find that some people will say it's a Russian group, they work for the FSB, and they just and then with the Conti leaks it was interesting because it wasn't like the entire group working for the FSB. They weren't on the payroll. It was like one guy, who kind of knew a guy and kind of was getting directions and stuff like that, and so I think that brings on different perspectives, because also I find that one of the responsibilities of an analyst to actually explain that just because it's coming from a Chinese IP address doesn't necessarily mean that the PLA is out to get you.
Right, and who knew that you can use spoof IPs? I mean, who knew that?
I know, it's like, what a concept,
When we turn out to be news scrapers, we are the most expensive news scraper you own if that's the only thing you use us for. And by saying that is we as analysts and team leaders, we need to be better at doing what I call expectation management. Yes, sir, I get that you're interested in topic X, but we can deliver on topic Y that might support you on topic X on this way, on that time. And that's what I'm going to do for you. demonstrate, one, the value you can do, and then also limit and do the expectation management so they're not turning out to be, we are not turning out to be new scrapers. I can give you, through Feedly or some other vendor, update and summary on certain topics for you on your email, in your email, every morning at 6:30. Right? I can do that for you. It doesn't cost me more than 15 minutes to set up, and that's what you're going to get. That's fine. My resources is going to be used on the added value to us in our organization. This is what I can do. These are the list of things I can get to you. These are the decisions, because I know you and your role. These are the decisions you can make based on what I'm doing for you. Does that sound good, right?
Yes.
Having that strong footprint of what we can and cannot do, what intelligence is and what it is not, and how it can help you. That's what's missing here, right?
Yeah.
And one thing you mentioned, but I see a lot, is the whole, now you're doing CTI, and your background is malware analysis or log analysis or working in the SOC or incident response. You have no understanding what the intelligence part is. You might have done the SAN CTI course, the 578. Great. That's 6 days. 3 of them are about intelligence. I did 6 months to 9 months of intelligence training. 3 days versus, 6 months.
Yes.
That's a huge difference.
Yes.
Should you be an expert in intelligence? Well, the title is cyber threat intelligence, not just cyber.
Yes.
Right? So to me, there's a huge missing element of the intelligence side of cyber threat intelligence. Thus, the reason I'm doing the PhD.
Yeah. But also intelligence, what? Intelligence analyst, intelligence engineer, intelligence collector. What? Like I said, we don't have standards for what these roles are and what we're supposed to expect of them. What I would always say is that when I first started kind of creating our intelligence program, our mission statement was very much focused on cyber risks. We're focused on cyber risks, not cyber threats, cyber risks, and risks and threats are different.
Yes.
Yes, for one. But so I would say I'm looking at, as a group, we're looking at anything that could potentially pose a cyber risk. That could be malware and vulnerabilities and things like that. But it can also be the geopolitical landscape, because it's causing a chain reaction that might end up, causing something to happen. And so that's where I take a broader view of intelligence to support cyber risks instead of just saying cyber intelligence.
Yeah. I agree. What type of training and sort of foundation are you putting your team through?
Yeah. So for us, it's a little bit difficult because we are a nonprofit. And so we don't have a lot of budget. I would say if you are a for-profit company, it is definitely within, your interest to, devote a considerable amount of training budget to your people. For a nonprofit, we kind of always have to kind of justify why we're doing something. So a lot of that tends to be internal. Because we do hire people from different walks of life, so, I know, at this point, sometimes diversity is almost considered a bad word, but I consider diversity of thought and background essential, because we're not all the same. Just because a malware analyst isn't necessarily a threat intel person doesn't mean I don't need them. I need somebody with that background. I need somebody who has maybe a security architecture background, or, or is coming from more of the traditional, strategic space like I did, or something like that, who knows how to write, not just a technical report, but an intelligence report. And you need people with all those different types of experiences and training in those areas to then help train your coworker as well. Yeah. And so we do try to make use of a lot of the free training, because SANS has some free training, especially during COVID. They had a lot of free training, actually. And then a lot of the vendor space now, they have tools that they want you to buy, of course, but at the same time, sometimes they do actually offer free training to help you understand, what does that mean? How do you use this tool? And even if we don't have that specific tool, the training itself is actually very valuable, because it is teaching you the steps to go through, things like, just like even something simple like PDNS analysis and things like that. And so, trying to make use of that. And then if we can get budget for an actual training class, push them through. There are some interesting companies that specialize in the risk space that are starting to do now more intelligence, tradecraft, and writing courses for private sector specifically. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of these interesting classes to me are the ones that combine the risk and the CTI together.
Yeah, I agree. And there is the range of quality of the training is also an issue. I see some trainings are really, really good, and they're focusing on if you were a government agency, it would work. But you're probably maybe a public sector or even a private sector, and the way that it's trained doesn't work in the private sector. That's one issue I see. The other issue is people who have really good knowledge in how to do, for instance, intelligence or malware analysis, they go really deep into that. But then you come home and you know all the fantastic click, click, click. You can do all the things, but how does that relate to your job, your function? How can you apply it into your job? That's an interesting gap too. When people come home from training, people have a tendency to be on fire when they come back, and then after a week, maybe a month, it's like, yeah, we're back to whatever I did before I did the training.
Yeah.
There's a gap here. Have you experienced that too? Or?
Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately for the analysis side, there's not that many training classes out there. It's starting to be more than there was 15 years ago, but I think that's still a gap that needs to be addressed. But it is important that the trainer knows how to do these things instead of, sometimes what happens in the private sector is that, like I said, they're just called suddenly one day an analyst and expected to know what that means. And then they spend years trying to do that role without any sort of training. And then eventually they're training other people on what to do, even though they never had the original training.
Have you ever taught intelligence at all?
No, not formally. I mean, obviously, being a manager, you have to kind of, train people as you come along, and so I never would have considered myself a teacher. And to be honest, I think I would be a horrible teacher, just because I don't have. I don't know. I don't think I have the structured kind of approach on how to teach people, because it is another skill. I think another, really undervalued skill is being a teacher, because you really, everybody knows that they've had good teachers and they've had really bad teachers before. And I think I would hope to be an okay teacher.
I think you would be amazing because of your personality and how you are. I think it would be amazing. And you have the broad skill sets, right? But is that the best use of your time in your organization? Maybe not.
But I'm always happy to kind of talk to people about, well, this is how I do it, and this is, my approach to it, and kind of explain it that way. And I've had some people over the years come back and they said, oh, you were such a great teacher. And I was like, I was, because I never kind of considered it teaching. I was just kind of mentoring, a colleague or somebody I managed.
In terms of intelligence, how would you define? We talked about value before. How would you define success in your job, and what does success look like? What is the situation where you, the team, you're successful, and you got to get some sort of feedback, I guess. So, what is success?
I think there are different levels of success, because we'll have successes within the team, and we're super proud of ourselves. It's really great, but translating that success outside of the team, is a little bit harder. There are, people who, their definition of success is revenue. How much revenue does it bring in at the end of the day, or how much revenue does it save us? How much money does it save us at the end of the day? Cost
This
cutting.
is to me the metrics type of thing, right?
Yes, and then other people that are looking for the win. The good news story of how what says like this is something we did and we're so proud of publicly, and so success means different things to different people.
Agreed.
And no matter how big or small your company is, you're going to deal with different definitions of success. And some people will say that person is a genius and we love what that team does. Other people will say, I can never really use anything that they do. And so I think as a manager, you have to be sensitive to that. And it is hard. Sometimes it's very frustrating. But you have to be able, how can we recognize sometimes the internal successes and then translate that to people who maybe aren't really as aware of why that we consider that a success, and then help them understand it. And for them, it's, I think a lot of humans are inherently selfish creatures because we always kind of think of what does it mean to me? How does it help me? How does it help my function? And if they don't find that direct link of how it helps their function, to them it's not a success. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we kind of need to be better translators of what we're doing and how that impacts the stakeholders.
Yeah, I get that. So when we talked about it a little bit already about metrics, what does good look like, value. What are good metrics or way to measure success in terms of intelligence, cyber threat intelligence? How do you do that? I mean, how would you do it if you can't talk about how you are doing it?
For me, it has to be both qualitative and quantitative metrics. Yes, you want to understand volumes. You want to understand, workloads on your analysts. Maybe differences of volumes over time, things like that. So quantitative metrics are important, but you also need to bring some of the qualitative, why is it important, those types of measures. And you also need to analyze those metrics as well in terms of, are we doing better or not? Are we having gaps or not? And understanding what those are, because I've seen in multiple different jobs where people just throw figures up on, a chart, and, they are very proud of those numbers, but what do those numbers mean at the end of the day? Is that number a good number? Is it a bad number? What does it mean in terms of the big and overall picture? And I think that to me is that, I love metrics. I think metrics are a fabulous thing to have, but it's because I believe in data-driven analysis. And so I want good metrics to drive my analysis of the program and whether or not the program is being successful.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting, right? So a lot of people, when they do metrics, they do metrics on how many reports, how many IOCs, and all of those things, which is really interesting just for the reasons you said. What is the pressure on the team? Are we, on par with what we're expecting to deliver with the number of people, number of incidents? I get that, right? But then what is the value? What is the value of what we're delivering? And how do you measure value in terms of how many reports? You can write 10 reports, all of them ended up in a desk. You can write one report, which is circulated across the organization and shared with the wider network because it was really good.
Yeah.
That's value. Do you at all try to measure that value type, or are you just measuring the how do you do that?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really hard, because you can do something like readership metrics of understanding how many people clicked on it and at least opened it up, and then maybe the more qualitative comments that you get back. Somebody say, "This was fantastic, thanks so much. This was I'm using this now to integrate into my internal documentation," or something like that, and you have those more kind of feedback type of metrics, I guess. But you do have to kind of, assess it, because if you do have to make a decision of, we have to cut down how many reports we are doing, do we cut report A or do we cut report B? You want to see which one's more valuable to your customer. And if you do it just purely on maybe clicks, I think you're missing something. And I think you have to understand more of, what value did it give your stakeholder? And sometimes funny enough is that you find the most value feedback when you actually cut something off, and then suddenly people come in, because I do find that sometimes, unfortunately, your readership, your stakeholders, sometimes they're much quicker with negative feedback than they are positive feedback. And so if everything's nice and they're happy, they'll just keep on consuming it and consuming it. If something's not good, then they'll tell you about it.
Yeah.
But, you want them to tell you that it's good. You want them to tell you if you're on the right track. Yeah. And, I think especially sometimes the way we work is very in virtual environments. And so, you might not get that chance for that person to tell you whether or not it was good until you see them at the next meeting.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I mean, your organization supports maybe thousands of organizations. My organization that I work in supports 200 or 240 plus organizations. I can't service and make everyone happy, right? I have to figure out what is good enough for my most important stakeholders. And who are those? Well, they have to figure out that too, right? That's a huge part of the process I had to go through. Who are my stakeholders? Which one are the ones that counts? Why do they count? What are they asking for? How can we connect the products we're doing? And then ask them.
Yes.
Sit down and talk with them. Book a meeting and sit down. Hey, we generated product XYZ for you. Oh, they were great. Good. What decisions did you make? Decisions? What? No, I just read it. Okay. So we spent months on this, and you put it in a drawer. You didn't make any decisions. Should we figure out a way where we can actually start delivering value to you? What are your current projects? What are you going to do projects for next year? What type of information, data, and intelligence do you need to make those decisions? Oh, I need this, that. I'm going to do that. Oh, by the way, Kathy, hey, I'm not going to do this, and then we need that. Can you talk to her about that? And suddenly you have what we call in Norwegian orders, right? Bookings. What is it that you need to produce over the next 6 months to help this important stakeholder to make the decisions? Then sit down after 6 to 9 months and say, hey, we generated these five, 6 products for you. Oh, great, I made decisions on that, and you supported me on that, but that thing didn't help at all. Great. Now let's make this work into a dynamic process where we always focus on the value to you.
Yes.
That's where I want to go, right?
Yes.
That's the intel side. And I think cyber people have a tendency to hide behind screens and this is the indicators done, and then this are the indicators done. That's great, but
I did have somebody ask me that at a conference once because I was talking to them about the value of intelligence and how to build that into your risk management programs and things like that. And somebody from the crowd raised their hand and they said, but how do you find out what your stakeholder wants? And I said, well, you have to ask them. I was like, I know for, cyber people especially, we do tend to be introverted. We do tend to be, happy, tucked down onto our little keyboards and typing away. I know I can spend hours like that. But you do, at the end of the day, have to get up out of your chair, maybe figuratively, virtually, and talk to people. And that's where I also find in-person events so invaluable because if you just kind of send an email and saying, hey, I just wanted to check to see how you liked that product or something like that, you might get a very polite reply and said, oh, it was a lovely read, thank you. It's something, but you don't get the meat, of why it's important. And sometimes, you will get that if you're on the coffee break and, everybody's standing in line and everything like that and you're chit-chatting and then they say, oh, yeah, we used it for this and this and this. And that's gold. And you don't get that from, a kind of a closed virtual environment necessarily. You do actually have to get out of the desk and talk to people.
I turn into a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
I say, why? Oh, it's because of that. Why? Oh, no, well, it's because of this. Why? So after 5 whys, you usually get down to the really meat of it all, right? I do it jokingly, right? But still, people react to it. Of course, why? Yeah, why is that?
Yeah.
And then you have to think through, and then maybe it wasn't that valuable.
Yeah.
Really interesting. I'll start taking notes, right? But don't be afraid to ask why.
Yeah, and that's actually more important is when you find that it's not valuable because you can actually action on that. Everybody talks in CTI about actionability and stuff like that. That is actionability. If somebody says they didn't like what you just put out, why? And then try to make that change. And how can you put that into your next report so that it is more valuable at that point? And I think sometimes we, not just CTI, but all analysts in all types of ints, we're just happy doing what we're doing and we push it out without necessarily any regard with closing that intelligence cycle loop of understanding the feedback. And then how does that feedback drive your new planning and direction?
Yeah. And if you're going to give an advice to someone who wants to measure value of what they're doing, what should they do in terms of metrics and value? How should they start this?
Yeah, I think for me, it all starts with your client, your customer. So, if you're government, that could be, like for me, I was working with, in NCIS, I was working with a lot of special agents or maybe like Navy commanders trying to decide whether or not to pull their ship into a port or not because of the threat environment. So first off, I need to understand who my readers are. Who's using my intelligence? If I don't even know that, we had a phrase that it's a self-licking ice cream cone. You're just writing for other intelligence people. And I've argued with people about that too, because sometimes they'll be like, oh, but this is not about intelligence, this is about security. And I'm like, how, what do you think the security people are going to use at the end of the day to understand their prioritization and stuff like that? Because there are some executives who believe that the only people who read intelligence are intelligence people. And and that just... Ooh. That is so not what we're supposed to do. I mean, intelligence people, of course, we use each other's work, of course, just like academics will use each other's work. But at the end of the day, you do have a stakeholder. You do have a decision maker who's trying to decide, to, pull a ship into a port, or to what's the next step of their, operation, or, what to invest in. And those, once you understand how they're going to use your intelligence, it is easier to write the intelligence report at that point, to me anyway. And so I tell everybody, and they probably, roll their eyes at this point when I say this, audience and purpose. Who's your audience, and why are you writing this report for them?
Bam, value, mic drop.
Yeah,
it is.
That's right. I'm done here. Yeah.
I'm done. Pack it up.
That's right. But I say that all the time, audience and purpose, audience and purpose.
I love it. So when we talk about the same thing, how would you suggest someone do or measure value and metrics, for implementing AI in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years?
So I think as soon as people say AI, for some reason they feel like everything changes, everything drops. And, not to diminish the value that AI will give us as a profession, in an industry like we are in. I don't want to diminish it, but at the same time, it doesn't mean like suddenly human beings have changed what they're going to do, or that business decisions have changed what they're going to do. It's still part of everything else, like even like threats. I find it interesting sometimes that they'll say, well, these aren't cyber threats, these are AI threats. And I've had somebody say that to me before, and you just have to kind of think, what does that mean? And until the day that, Arnold Schwarzenegger has come out, I'll be back, and they're making the decisions that humans are making and things like that. Until that day comes where humans are no longer part of the equation, I think AI is still just a tool.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to treat it as a tool, whether it's a tool that the bad guys are using or a tool that the good guys are using. And, at the end of the day, it is, somebody has made a decision to use AI for a purpose, and what is that purpose, and how can you understand that? And if you're talking about how you're using AI, how can it help you do the work that you're doing? And maybe it's just the limited types of functions, like when the internet first came. Suddenly, we weren't going to the library and having to kind of look things up and kind of, pulling a million books off the shelf and kind of looking at those. AI, the internet actually changed all that for us, where we could just go on our computers and check it out, and Wikipedia and things like that, where all these things were suddenly at our fingertips. I saw, the other day I actually went on to the Encyclopedia Britannica online site and looked something up, and I just laughed because there was, I remember the series of books that you would have to just go through just to look up simple concepts. And, the internet changed so much of how we do what we do. I think AI will do that as well. But just like the internet did not replace the analyst, I don't think AI will replace us either. I think it will change things, and it has to change things. So things like in cyber, intelligence, like automation. I think automation is key because, yes, it's great that you handled 60,000 IOCs, but you should probably not handle 60,000 IOCs. It probably should be, some sort of automation that goes through.
Yeah, and the machine learning part, where we have used the AI part for many, many years already. And that gets me a little bit when people are saying, the threats are using AI. I'm like, yes, we have been doing that for 10, 15 years. What's your point? Yeah. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? They do something, we do something, we do something better, they do something to counter and do something better. That cat and mouse thing has been going on for ages.
That's the entire business model for Amazon Marketplace, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's machine learning, understanding what your shopping habits are.
Yeah, you search for something and suddenly you get, baby food and baby carrier, and then suddenly, holy moly, what's going on here, right? So no, that has happened. How do you envision the future of intelligence going forward? I mean, with AI and everything. I mean, what will change in your mind?
I think a lot of things will change, but I'm hoping that it's going to be one of those things that it's a little bit of a fad right now. It's not a fad that's going to go away like skinny jeans, but it's going to, it is here to stay. But, right now it's like everybody wants it, everybody needs it, without understanding what it is. And I think once that kind of fad kind of hysteria kind of goes back and settles in, hopefully there will be much more of a objective conversation of, okay, how do we use it and how do we develop it and what does this mean in terms of cost and resourcing and what, at the end of the day, what's the purpose? We shouldn't just have AI just for the sake of having AI. We should have a purpose in mind of what we're going to do with that AI. Just like
value?
I've compared it to a few years ago, everybody was like, we need a distributed ledger. Why do you need a distributed ledger? For what purpose? And it just because it's the newest technology out there. So everybody needs a distributed ledger. You have a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah. And I feel many times, at least now with LLMs, everything, they're trying to solve problems that wasn't a problem in the first place.
Yes.
And that's one thing. And the other thing is that they ignore the critical thinking.
Yes.
And that gets me a little bit in terms of, the AI said. Well, that's great, but what do you think? Yeah. And I don't need a parrot to repeat everything on the internet. I need your thoughts, your analysis, your added value. But that's just me ranting. I think I'm the old guy in the peanut gallery, in the Muppet Show, and just screaming at the clouds. But we'll see. In the finance sector, at least since we both work in it, the sector is heavily regulated. So that means sometimes they have this issue where you say, no, we need this new thing. And because of DORA, which is very European, or NIS2, there are new standards. All those standards you have to apply, and you have to do it. In my mind, at least, it seems like the finance sector is better protected than many other sectors. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I see it all the time, especially when you're trying to work cross-sector, the finance sector does tend to be the most mature of it. Is it that because smarter people are in the finance sector? No, it's because we're regulated. It's because we've been forced to be better at something. And so because of all the regulations that we have in terms of protecting, private data of our customers and things like that, Bank Secrecy Act, whatever it might be, we have to be better at security. And this, brought in intelligence to support the security. Yeah. And in that sense, we're ahead of the curve because we've had more years to do it in and more kind of pressure from the outside. But now all the other industries are getting into it, now because usually, unfortunately, because they've been attacked, they've realized that we actually have to do something about this, whether it's healthcare or water utilities, energy utilities and things like that. They do realize that this is not just a nice to have, this is a must have.
And you touched this before. What type of training, courses, certificates, and others do you think teams should have? Not yours specifically, but other teams. Yeah, no,
in general, I would love it if eventually there's a few different places to get training where, some of it is virtual, some of it's in person, because I do think there are some types of training that you really do need to have like somebody there to help you out and understand. But then also some advice of how to keep that up on the job, but also the training for the managers. So we do have like management training for the cybersecurity side of things. We should have management training for intelligence as well. And I think that will help the C-suite understand what to expect from us. And also when they go into that next job, to demand that from their intelligence team as well. Or especially if they don't even have an intelligence team. Why don't they have an intelligence team? And, obviously there's a lot of things that they have to assess in terms of the need and the budget for it. But they need to be able to say, but this will help us because of X, Y, and Z, and then this is what you need to invest to get that in place.
Yeah, and that brings me into how do you get buy-in from management or others to get people to training, to start using and applying intelligence? Let's say someone who isn't doing it already.
Yes. And I think that's the hardest thing because especially if a manager doesn't know how to use intelligence, or worse, thinks that they do, but they really don't, because sometimes that can be even more painful to deal with. They just kind of think that, well, that person's smart, they should be able to figure it out. That person has a degree, they should be able to figure it out. They used to do X, Y, and Z in their last job, so why do they need training?
Yeah.
And trying to argue that is very difficult. And I think in some ways you might need to wait until you've had those successes to be able to say, this is what training gives you, is this type of success. So now we need to train another set of people to be able to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this develops because of AI, etc. We talked about this already, but what is, and you mentioned it, I think, what is AI to you?
And for me right now, it's still a tool. It's not my job competition.
Yeah.
It is a tool to be used. And just like at the beginning, cyber was a tool. Cyber was a tool that spies used. Cyber was a tool that terrorists start to use, and criminals, narco traffickers. They started all going into the digital space, and then cyber ended up being that way to kind of understand what they're doing and defend against it and things like that. That didn't mean that they stopped doing drugs in order to just work on malware. It meant that it was a tool that they used. And I think it's another thing with AI. The bad guys will use it, the good guys will use it, but it is still at the end of the day a tool.
Yeah, and how will it change how we do intelligence going forward, you think?
I'm hoping that it will make us more efficient, because just like with the advent of the internet and how it came and helped us with our research, I'm hoping AI will get to a point to make it more efficient. So, wouldn't it be fantastic if, there was an LLM just based upon a library's kind of, resources, and then you can kind of understand what's in the library without having to, chase around it. All the intelligence journals and academic journals that are out there, putting it into one model and helping you go from there. But you still have to be trained on how to use the AI as well, because you shouldn't just be like saying, well, I gave it a question, this is what it said, so that must be true, or copying and pasting whatever it said as well. You need to use that as a tool to then drive your your critical thinking and your analysis. So you should always still kind of say, but why does it give me that answer? Where did they get that from? Is it from this source that might be biased? Was it from this source that maybe actually years later, they found that they were inaccurate or coming from, not a full data set or something like that. And so you still need to use it to drive your critical thinking skills, but it might make the research so much faster to be able to at least point you to things to look up.
Yeah. I use the AI for one of two purposes. One, if I know everything about what I'm doing, I start writing, and I can use it to spar with and think about new concepts and ideas and stuff. That works sometimes, right?
Okay.
And out of the 50 or so examples it gives me, maybe one or two I'm like, oh, those were actually interesting, and I can start applying it into what I'm working with. And I'm talking about LLM specifically, right? And then the other side is if I don't know anything about it, I use it as a starting point to understand the basics and overview, but then I go out and research deeper.
Yes.
So I know where to look, what to look for, the concepts, enough to start searching, right? And sometimes, hey, that concept doesn't even exist. But that, we talked about that already.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important approach to it. What are you worried about over the next 2-3 years of AI, LLMs, whatever you want to focus on in terms of applying intelligence and apply it in intelligence, or cyber threat intelligence?
My main worry is that if you don't start to kind of train executives on what they should be expecting from the intelligence realm and how to integrate that into their companies or wherever they might be, they're going to feel like AI can answer all their intelligence problems. And I think that for instance, if they say right now that we're going to be, firing all the junior people, riffing them, I guess is the new concept of reduction in force. But if we're going to riff all the junior people because now AI can do their work for them, how is that cadre of junior people going to get any sort of job experience at that point? And, are we creating huge gaps in our workforce because we didn't go through the talent pipeline to build experience from the ground up? And so I think there needs to be almost like philosophical debates about, when you use AI and when you don't use AI. Right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of eager beavers saying, this is the coolest thing in the world. We're just going to have it do everything. And that's what scares me, is that once they get to that point of having it do everything, what if it gives them the wrong things?
Yeah.
And then they're going to sit there going, well, I didn't know, it's not my fault. It's the model's fault. It's, whoever's fault it is. And then suddenly they're going to go back. And this is what happens with our industry all the time, though. We yo-yo. We go back and forth. People start saying, oh, the budget's tight, so we're going to start, riffing intel people and or security people or something like that. And then something happens and they go back to say, wait, actually this is necessary. We really do need this. But we always see that going back and forth, and especially over the past 2 decades. That's what I've definitely seen is, suddenly everybody needs intel and then they start getting laid off. And then everybody needs intel again and then they start getting laid off. And I think this is unfortunately something that I do worry about with AI, that it's going to lead to a lot of people getting laid off. And we actually have already started seeing that.
And sometimes when I stand on stages and I talk to, CTI people or risk people, I usually say the effects of, if you're getting fired, it's because those who decided to fire you doesn't see the value of you. We need to focus on delivering value. We need to understand our stakeholders, what's valuable to them. If they're going to fire people and say, no, the Intel team, they're our rock. They support me in the important projects I work on, then you won't get fired, hopefully. Right? Yeah. That's sort of the goal, what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to work or start to work with intelligence or cyber threat intelligence, what advice would you give them?
I would give them first the resources that we started out with, some of the tried and true methodologies, like the psychology of intelligence analysis. I find that, just essential. You don't have to know names. I know some people who will say a term or a title of a book or something like that as a way to test you. And it's like, no, it's the concepts that matter at the end of the day. And when I first started out, we all had that little purple pamphlet that was sitting on our desks, from our first, training that you would kind of flip through and stuff like that. And it would talk about critical thinking, basically. And critical thinking to me is one of the most essential things you can learn how to do, whether you're doing CTI work or whether you're a medical professional or, an insurance, investigator or whatever you might be. Critical thinking skills are essential for everybody. I try to tell my kids that too when they're just on looking at TikTok or whatever. Why is that person saying that? Where did they get that information from? What is their source? And trying to get them to understand that it's not just about what you're reading or what you're hearing. You have to look deeper. You have to ask why. You have to be that 5-year-old asking why all the time. And I think that's the first step. And then it's more of the specific skill sets that you're looking for. So whether it's doing, working with the IOCs, working with malware, working with, understanding geopolitics and that picture, that to me is secondary. Your first step is to understand why you need to be a critical thinker.
I agree. And also the curiosity, I guess, is the overlaying or underlaying personality part here too, right? Being curious about... Yeah. That means you're also asking the why and trying to figure out why stuff is the way it is or work the way it does or why it's happening the way it does. The curiosity is what driving you to setting up your malware lab or doing, CTFs or learning more about concepts. And then it's not about the degree or the certification in my mind, but demonstrating and showing that you're curious, that you're engaged, that you're part of and want to be a part of either the cyber threat intelligence or incident responders or in intelligence. And if you want to work in intelligence, sometimes there's this question of, well, should I have an education? It helps. Should I focus on language? It helps. if you want to work in certain fields.
Yeah.
Figure out where you want to go and where you want to end up, and then chase it. Covered, understand like a checklist and start ticking stuff off. I've done the bachelor's, done the master's, done the courses, done the language. Start applying and then see what happens. That's for the intel world. For cyber, be engaged with networks. There's a lot of communities. Oh, where can I find them? Google. Be curious. Join in different communities, and before you know it, be valuable. And then before you know it, you get invited into close groups and into the really good resources, and that's where people know each other. And then when you apply and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a job," people will open doors for you. Don't hide behind the computer and complain. Engage.
And I would say too, if you're just starting out and you're in the interview cycles, be part of that question back to your interviewer, because yes, you're being interviewed, but they're also looking for your curiosity level and what you're interested in. But also you're talking to people that have been in the job now for a while, so use them as a resource, pick their brains. What would you recommend? What do you read? What do you, how did you get started? And ask those types of questions. I've had a few interviewees who actually, do pick my brain during an interview, and I find that fascinating actually, because it's almost like a little window of opportunity to train the next generation. But also, even if they don't get the job, they've taken something out of that interview process besides just feeling kind of depressed that they didn't get the job.
Yeah, right. And for every one of those, and we had that too, right? There's been forks in the road where we made decisions, or someone was really valuable for you making a decision that changed your life and your trajectory. Have you ever had that, and what did that look like?
Absolutely. I kind of label myself kind of sometimes a nomad, and I do look for opportunities and I take them. So at one point, early on in my career, they said, we're going to try something out and we're going to put an analyst out into the field, and who's interested in that? And at the time, I no husband, no kids, nothing like that. So I raised my hand. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'll do that. And so I volunteered to go into the field, and I got my first assignment in the Middle East field office. And before that, I was working in the typical kind of intelligence directorates where you have dozens of people. It's the Dilbert cubicle world, where just tons of us who are set there doing, intelligence analysis and things like that. But you never talk to your stakeholder in those types of rooms. Yeah. And so when I went into the field, I was sat next to my intelligence, my stakeholder, and they weren't shy about telling me whether or not they thought I was valuable or not, what I was doing. And that changed my entire perspective of my profession at that point, because to me, it was in my face whether or not, the feedback cycle was in my face of, whether or not they put it in the drawer, that sort of thing. And so you're instantly, almost in real time, trying to kind of adjust and figure out, what does this person need? How can I help them? And then you find somebody who's in the same job function as that person, but because they're two different human beings, they want to receive something a little bit differently. And you have to tailor it to how they need it as a stakeholder and their personality profile. And so that taught me that it's not just this wonderful circle of the intelligence cycle of planning and direction and, and going back into the feedback loop, that, they're all human beings at the end of the day. And you need to figure out how, this is my audience, this is the purpose they have for the, needing an intel report from me. How do I make them happy with that? And having that experience did completely change things. The special agents I worked with at the time, even if it was harsh feedback, it was valuable feedback because it helped me grow as an analyst. And especially once they did like it, sometimes they did actually tell me they liked it, which was fantastic. I remember after I had left the agency, a few years afterwards, one of the agents was in town. So she was like, hey, do you want to, go out, meet up, get a drink and everything. And she even said, we miss your intelligence so much, because I wasn't just scraping the news or doing something. I was responding to their need. And that's something that they weren't able to get from, a group of 100 analysts, thousands of miles away. And even once I got to the point where I was back in DC and in that kind of environment again, I kept that in mind that I need to understand who my audience is, what the purpose is of what I'm writing for them, how they're going to use that, and then that's how I tailor it. And if I could, reach out to them and say, hey, Bob, George, whatever it was, be able to understand, that process. And, I think it did make me a more effective analyst at the end of the day, because I wasn't just writing a really good essay.
Yeah.
I was writing something for someone else.
And back then, when it happened and you got the feedback, how did that make you feel?
Oh, the first time you're devastated because,
Right.
Everybody, and I tell this to all, the young analysts as well, it's almost like hazing a little bit, like at the very beginning, because I even had my very first manager, I could tell that made him so uncomfortable too. He didn't want to do it, but he had to do it to teach me. And, it was the hard copy days where you had to print out your draft, and he handed it in, and then the teacher looks at it and everything. And so, he brings me into the office, and, he was just like really nervous because he's very introverted. And so he was just very nervous, and he wasn't making eye contact, and I could tell that he was just uncomfortable. And he hands me back my paper. Red everywhere.
Oh, I know the feeling.
Yeah. And, I'm like, I don't even know how old was I at the time, 22, 23 or something like that. And so, and you're like, I got awards in English class because my writing was so good, stuff like that. You're thinking that in your head, and then you're given red ink all over the place. And, that's what made him uncomfortable, because he knew I was going to be crushed. And I was like, kind of like, you're starting to tear up, because how could such something so beautiful be not valued, that sort of thing.
So many lessons in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but he did it. And later on, he even told me afterwards that, they do that consciously to every new person, because you have to learn that it's not just about writing a good essay like you would for English class. You have to write for a purpose and for your audience. And if you're not clear with that in the intelligence way of writing, then you'll get red marks. It doesn't matter if you're 22 or, 40 something, if you're not doing it, then you're not cutting it as an analyst.
Yeah, and I had the same thing. My first one, it was red. I couldn't I couldn't find the text.
Yes.
Right, it was so red and so many comments.
Yeah.
This is BS. You made it. Well, how do you defend that? Where is that in the data?
Yeah.
It was red all over, and she didn't mince word at all. She was like from northern Norway, and she was really direct. People from southern Norway, they usually don't like it. I loved it because it wasn't about me. The product wasn't good.
Yeah.
I wanted the product to be the best I could do in their eyes, so we can actually get it out the door. She was the release authority. She had the authority to say, this is what we're going to release from our department. And if it's not up to standard, it's about the product, not about me. Right? But other people didn't like it. I loved it.
But that's another differentiator when you're looking for staff is, are you going to be the type of person who's going to say, thank you so much for this feedback, I'm going to figure out what's going on? Or are you going to be the type of person who says, that person doesn't know anything? I created something beautiful and they just don't appreciate it. And
they don't understand.
They don't understand. And I think we've all been in that place where we're like, they don't understand. But, at the end of the day, you do want somebody, especially somebody just getting into the industry, trust me, you don't know everything at 22. You don't know everything at 24.
But ChatGPT said.
Yeah, but ChatGPT said. But you need somebody who, it's a level of humility, isn't it?
Yeah,
of being able to say, I'm not right. I'm wrong, and I need to learn, and there's more things to learn.
Yeah, a lot of people, independent of age, need to have that on their shoulder a little bit. Yeah. I actually don't know everything. This is something new to me.
Yeah.
This has been an amazing conversation. thank you so much for taking the time. I've enjoyed our conversation. It's been enlightening. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to help out.